Welcome to the MAG Network Podcast. Hello everybody and welcome to this next edition of the Network Podcast. I'm joined today by Geoff Cadman. Geoff, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Good morning, Colin. I've been a MAG member. I first saw MAG years and years and years ago at the very first demonstration in Trafalgar Square. I got a radio message over my radio. I was a police constable in the Met at that time, in the early 70s, and they said there's some sort of kerfuffle going on at Trafalgar Square. Would I have a look? And I discovered that it was a MAG protest on the helmets, and that's when I first met MAG. Very friendly bunch, and I became a member shortly afterwards. And I've sort of been with the company ever since. Really, I did 6 years in the Met. I was 2 years as a cadet, and I was 4 years as a constable. And this is in the 1970s. I was at Cannon Row Police Station, Trafalgar Square, and what have you. And then I went on to what was then the brand new Royalty and Diplomatic Protection Group. But I transferred to the Hampshire Constabulary in 1975. And I worked all over Hampshire as a police constable, passed my promotion exam, and my boss said, you need some rural experience. All you've done is city policing, London and Portsmouth. So I became a detached rural beat officer on the A32 just south of the town of Alton. And I progressed through the ranks in Hampshire. I was on tactical firearms, and I was promoted to sergeant, then to inspector a few years later. Worked in the force control room. I became head of firearms and public order training, so a lot of tactical firearms operations as the governor rather than as a PC and a sergeant. I much preferred being a PC and a sergeant than the governor. I was more hands-on than perhaps I should have been actually at that time. And I finished my last year as the deputy head of the traffic division. And that's my police career. I live in Suffolk, and I work as a volunteer at the Imperial War Museum at Duxford.
Excellent. So obviously, I've invited you to come onto this this podcast today, and it was the invite was triggered by the Soapbox article that you did in the recent edition of the Open Road. Yeah. Obviously, I've not met you before today. I think we've exchanged a couple of emails at various points in the past, but it's obviously the first time I'm meeting you. But I was intrigued by your Soapbox article. For those who don't know, the Soapbox is basically the last article that appears in our members magazine each edition. And it gives people the opportunity to have a rant, talk about subjects that are important to them or things like that. They not necessarily the views of the Motorcycle Action Group, they're the views of the individual, and that's quite clearly stated at the top of the article. But it's an interesting way to get an idea of what floats people's boats and what gets people's goats. So I'm always interested to read them, and I found this one that you wrote, Geoff, to be particularly interesting. So I think first of all, do you want to go through the sort of like the line of argument, the topic that you were talking about there, because obviously it was to do with policing and your view of how it has changed over the years.
Sure. Well, yeah, those years include the started before I retired. I've been retired for 20 odd years. I came out of the job in 2001, having done my 30 years. And I tell people I did 30 years and 7 seconds, because the 7 seconds was the time it took me to turn my alarm clock off on the day I knew I didn't have to go in anymore, which was great. But I had a very, very interesting career in the police, and particularly when I was a deputy divisional commander in the town of Fareham, in between Portsmouth and Southampton. And it was listening to reading one of your articles, Colin, on motorcycle theft that really piqued my interest, and it really crystallised a number of things that I experienced over the years, which I would sort of consider to be the start of the decline of policing as it was up until the end of the 20th century. And that's what piqued me to sort of start that article, in that the work that you are doing in trying to sort of talk to various police forces and focus them on the scourge of motorcycle theft really did strike a chord with me, because when I was at Fareham, I had an excellent crime office manager, a detective sergeant, Andy Harrington, who came to me with some facts brought about by our brand new computer crime management system, which he got to grips with very quickly. And he said, you know, that 70%, over 70% of our volume crime, which is what we call, you know, the day-to-day thefts from motor vehicles, theft of motor vehicles, criminal. He said, I think that's being committed by possibly no more than 20 or 30 people in an area with a population of about 112,000. And so we put together a plan. I authorised the plan and found the overtime, and he went along and ran with it. And he said, it's no good what we were doing previously. The previous management team, they were having a target of the month or a target of the week, the face of the local criminal, and see if he said, we can't just dismiss this in a week. We need weeks and weeks to just take out one or two people, and I need a bigger team to do it. Can you support that? So I did, and for 3 months we did that. And in 3 months we took out maybe 4 of the 15 targets that we had, and we were already seeing crime dropping dramatically because we were taking out these people. Plus, we were getting out the message to the rest of their fraternity. I was going to use a slightly ruder word then, to the rest of their criminal associates and fraternity, that we were coming for them. And then I had to stop because I couldn't find any more overtime, and the officers that I had to borrow from other areas, their bosses wanted them back. And that, very, very simply, is the nub of the problem, which has been escalated over the last 20 odd years to what we have today.
Yeah, I think from my experience, obviously doing this role and effectively having to sort of like build relationships, meet people in various forces, try and understand what is going on. The impression that I get is that the rank and file officers that are directly involved in dealing with this particular issue are just as passionate about it as we are. The great issue that they face, though, is that they don't necessarily have the support from higher levels within the police to actually devote the kind of time and resource to that issue that they would like to.
Sure. We could go on. I could go on about some of the senior management issues that I've seen before me. I did mention it briefly. I was very much a hands-on chief inspector. Now, the guys and gals out on the street don't want a boss like me breathing down their neck every day, but they do like to know that I know what their problems are. And I considered that it was my job as a senior manager not to have all these officers working for me, but I considered that actually, as a manager, I was working for them. And my job was to clear their path of obstructions so that they could get on and fight the fire at the front end. And that's where my heart and soul was. My heart and soul was with the frontline officers. And there are far fewer of them today. The management and the doctrine of the police, in my opinion, has turned into some sort of two and a half decades social experiment. And I'm not a hang 'em and flog 'em type person. I consider myself a bit of a libertarian and a pacifist, but I get tough when toughness is required. And there has been a change in that sort of management doctrine, and in a lot of cases. So when you do get not a general pattern, blood and guts type leader, but when you get someone who really feels for and understands the problems of the front line, the troops down the front end love it, and that's what they want, and that has been eroded from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as you say, this is personal experience and personal opinion, and I think that it's important that we should give a right to reply to anybody who has an alternative view. So, if there is anybody listening who does not agree with this, then we'd be more than happy to talk to and listen to them. But certainly, from my perspective, I mean, one of the things that you mentioned in the article was around the She report back in the early 90s. And one of the things that came out of that was, I think the term that was used was civilianisation of the police force, or introducing civilian members into the police force. And obviously you touched on the article about PCSOs. Now, from my experience, there was a recent video that was released by Humberside Police following the death of a a delightful young man on a motorcycle that he happened to have stolen. Now, this was obviously a video that was released by by Humberside Police. It clearly gone through all their vetting, their communications people, making sure that it was on message and all this kind of stuff. So we can take it as this is a message that's coming from the police force. But it was an interview with a PCSO who knew the individual that had lost his life and was the first on scene, as it turned out. But one of the comments that she made that really got my goat, shall we say, was, well, we knew that he stole motorcycles, but I couldn't tell him to stop because we knew how much it excited him, how much he enjoyed doing it. And you think, I'm sorry, but you're the voice of the police here, and you're saying that you cannot tell an individual that he's not allowed to break the law. I mean, I understand the compassion of somebody's lost their life and the impact on his family and everything else. But in the lead up to that event, you effectively helped to allow that to happen by not being tougher with him. And I think this is one of the things that, from a public perception point of view, we want the police to be tough with criminals. But it seems to be, well, it's more of a social worker than a police officer, the role of the PCSO. Again, I'm not sort of like trying to make an attack on the individual here,
No.
but it's more to do with how does this come out from a police force? What is it that's changed in terms of the mentality of police that's the kind of content that they'll be putting out on as their position?
Yeah, first and foremost, I didn't know that story, and I could feel myself cringing as you told it. I've got nothing but respect for anyone who steps up and tries to make a go of the job that I did for 32 years. It's not for shrinking violets. You can't deal with hardcore career criminality by, as I used to say on some of my briefings, we can't deal with this person by waving a lavender-scented handkerchief under their nose. Sometimes we have to remove the mailed fist from the velvet glove and be decisive and be positive, and everything we do should be backed by the doctrine of whatever we do, it's got to be reasonable. Force has got to be reasonable. Reasonable force can stretch on a continuum from the lowest level, which is officer presence, i.e. you've turned up and your presence is a show of force, or it used to be. And then as you get to the top of the scale, you have the use of lethal force. And everything in between, there is this continuum. Now, what you just relayed to me, but coming from a PCSO, and also I'd like to state that people who step up, I'll reiterate, people who step up to become PCSOs, it's a paid job. We called them Blunkett's Bobbies when they first came in, because it was Blunkett, the Home Secretary of the day, that introduced them. I saw it, and most of my colleagues saw it, as someone who was given a pseudo-police uniform, a radio, and various bits of kit, but no powers of the police as such, no power of arrest, none of the other powers that we have. I mean, the police service is the only service in the UK that is actually authorised to use force on the public as and when it's necessary. So we used to take that very, very seriously. So no disrespect to anyone who's doing the job of a PCSO. It's great to have people like that alongside you, but looking at it in the bigger perspective, I would have rather have seen half of the strength of PCSOs given way to sworn officers. Special constables aren't paid; they get allowances, travel allowances, etc. But they do have a power of arrest, and this to me is the dichotomy. PCSOs paid, salaried, out they go. I like to see them as sort of community wardens, but more and more policing roles have been added to them, and they have not gone through the same training regime. They hadn't as I had. So that to me is they've not filled the gap that was created by the erosion of officers, by the shedding of 20,000 or more roles. I was at the NEC a few years ago at the motorcycle show, queuing up to get in, with thousands and thousands of others, and suddenly my voice, someone shouted my name from across the hall, and it was two of my former guys. In my last year in the job, I was deputy head of the traffic division, and these two guys were on my old section 15, 20 years earlier in Portsmouth. They were motorcyclists. And we got chatting about the job, and I said, well, what's gone wrong? What's happening down there? And the one guy who retired, who was a traffic sergeant, motorcyclist, said, do you remember the section that you looked after, Geoff? The Eastern Traffic Motorcycle section? I said, yep. How many of us were there? I said, 3 sergeants and 18 constables. He said, today there is 1 sergeant and 4.
In the article, you also mentioned about the role of police and crime commissioners and the way that the shots are being called politically, but it seems that the main political motivation seems to be cost cutting. It does make me wonder what's your view on police and crime commissioners? You think that's been a help or a hindrance to policing, or is it something that you'd want to see discontinued? Are there good ones and bad ones?
Yes, and yes. I saw when it was first introduced, most of my senior colleagues at the time looked at it and thought, why? Because we had police authorities before, and they were cross-party. And these police and crime commissioners were introduced almost on the plan seemed to be on the back of a fact packet. It was, I think it was Cameron's government at the time. There was scant information put out about who or what they did. Being a former police officer when they were introduced, I knew the inside story and how the machinery worked, and even I couldn't work out what exactly they were supposed to be doing based on the information that was given out prior to the election. So we had an apathetic electorate voting for something that they didn't understand. Now, is that democracy? I don't know. I mean, Winston Churchill once said democracy was the worst form of government apart from all the others.
Yeah.
But you know, was that democratic, having maybe 20% of the electorate voting for something that some of them might have read up on, but couldn't find very much about? But the important point for me was they were being elected under a political banner. I joined the job to be apolitical. When I put that uniform on, I was supposed to be neutral. Whatever views I had to just stay in the basket. And here we have a crime commissioner under a political banner, one person feeding, liaising with the chief constable and having the power to hire and fire the chief constable. I don't like it. Don't like it. It's political, and I do not like it when politics gets involved in policing, which should be neutral across the board.
Yeah. Do you have any particular views? I mean, there's obviously London's the key example where effectively the mayor takes on the role of the police and crime commissioner as well as being mayor. That's not the same case in everywhere. So the West Midlands Combined Authority, there's a mayor, Andy Street, but there's also a police and crime commissioner for the West Midlands Police. Do you think one or other model is better?
There could be another rant coming on if we start talking about London. I remember the interviews that MAG had with the newly elected mayor, and there was sort of, it was full of promise and hope, and we had lots of yeses and probablys, and it seemed to me that all of that, once MAG had left the building, was swept aside and thrown in the waste paper bin. The waste paper bin that perhaps one of his cleaners has to come in and empty on a 1990 Honda 90. So politics again, political mayor. What's going to happen next? Are we going to have a politically elected police chief like you have in America? I mean, there's corrupt practices with small C's and big C's, and it just seemed to me that you would not be able to stand in front of a crowd of the electorate, hand on heart, and say, I'm politically neutral, when you've got a politically elected mayor, a politically elected crime commissioner. Mm-hmm. They might have all the goodwill in the world and be able to prove it, but if the perception of the public is this is politics interfering with policing, then you've got a problem.
One of the things that I'm sort of like looking into, trying to get the statistics to prove the case, is the connection between motorcycle theft and the KSI figures. Obviously, my concern is that, motorcycle casualty figures is one of those things that is always held up as this is the reason why we can't support or promote motorcycling.
A bad person will be a bad driver, won't care, rather, not be a bad driver, might be a brilliant driver, but they might be driving illegally. They just don't care about the law. And as far as bringing bikes into that equation are concerned, particularly with regards to theft, they're much easier to steal. You can't pick up a Ford Fiesta and stick it quickly into a transit van. So bikes are much easier to steal, and the police will not prevent those thefts from happening. That's their raison d'etre, but they won't do it because they haven't got the numbers anymore, and they've got other tasks as well. Their numbers have been going down as population has been going up. They're still probably the same smaller, hardcore criminals. Not like people might think the entire country is awash with crime. It's actually a small group within the larger population that's doing it.
The question is, has criminality increased, or has lack of policing effectively made it appear that criminality has increased? I don't think the population is less lawful. I think it's more a case of there's less being done to deal with the portion of the population that is criminal.
Exactly. I mean, what stops a person from breaking a law? Number one, the fear of being caught. Number two, the fear of the penalty if one is caught. And those two factors don't seem to be evident very much these days. Is this really the way to run a ballroom? I don't know. I don't think it is.
Okay, well, we've rambled on as I have a tendency to do for longer than we should have. We get complaints for making podcasts too long, so I suppose we should be drawing this to a conclusion here. But I'd like to thank you very much for your time, Geoff. And is there any parting comments or words of wisdom that you would like to share?
Support MAG, ride free, and don't let the legal eagles steamroller us. There's enough laws out there to deal with anything. We don't need more.
Spot on. I can't ask for more than that, can I? Thank you, Geoff.